Okay, it looks like you're ready to go on YouTube.
All right, very good. I'm going to call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order Tuesday, May 5th, 2020, 6:30 p.m. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Southborough Board of Selectmen will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website, www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive recording of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Again, I'll call the meeting to order, and all selectmen are present currently except for Selectman Healy, but we do anticipate that he will be joining. Mark, could you shoot him a text? He may be looking for the email with the link. Just let him know it's from April 28th.
Yeah, I will send that to him right now.
And our first appointment tonight is a 6:30 p.m. hearing. BKP Inc. doing business as Fitzgerald's General Store. Application for multiple amendments to annual package store / beer and wine license. Mr. Purple.
Mr. Chairman, notice is hereby given under Chapter 138 of the Massachusetts General Laws that BKP Incorporated doing business as Fitzgerald General Store has applied for multiple amendments, including change of officers and stock interest to the annual package store wine and malt beverages license currently held by Raman Bhatti K. Patel at 110 Southville Road, Southborough, Mass. A public hearing will be held by the Board of Selectmen, acting as the local licensing authority in a virtual meeting on Tuesday, May 5, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. Meeting may be viewed by the public through a link located at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings, Southborough Board of Selectmen Licensing Authority.
Very good. Just let the minutes reflect that Mr. Healy has joined the meeting. Sorry, Marty, we just got kicked off and read the notice for the public hearing. That Mr. Perlman is here to represent the applicants. Mr. Perlman, I'll turn it over to you if you have any statements you'd like to lead with.
Sure. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Arthur Perlman. I represent BKP Inc. doing business as Fitzgerald General Store at 110 Southville Road in Southborough. It's seeking a transfer of stock of the corporation from Raman Bhatti Patel to Hitendra Patel. Raman Bhatti had 100%. Hitendra Patel will have 50%, and Darshak Patel will have 50%. Just so you understand, Hitendra Patel is his son, Darshak Patel is his nephew. BKP is also seeking a change of officers, directors of the corporation, as well as a change of manager on the liquor license. Lastly, BKP is seeking a pledge of license to the Provident Bank. The corporation holds a wine and malt beverage liquor store license, and therefore this stock ownership officer, director, manager, as well as the pledge of license must be approved by the town as well as the ABC. The town of Southborough has published notice of this virtual meeting in the Metro West Daily News on April 20th, 2020. Mailed notice to abutters is not required for these types of changes. BKP is a Massachusetts corporation. If the transfer of stock and changes are approved, Hitendra Patel will be the president, treasurer, and secretary. Hitendra and Darshak Patel will be the directors. and each of them will be 50% shareholders. Hitendra Patel will be the manager on the license. Hitendra lives at 13 Westcott Drive in Hopkinton. Hitendra, as the manager on the liquor license, will spend 40 hours a week at the business. The current operating hours will be maintained. The layout of the store will be maintained. Nothing regarding the operation of the business is changing. This is all about corporate structure, stock ownership, and the manager on the license, as well as the pledge of the license. Hitendra Patel is familiar with the laws relative to the sale of alcohol and will uphold the statutory laws as well as any rules or regulations of the town of Southborough regarding the sale of alcohol. I would respectfully request the change of officer, director, stockholder, or manager on the license, as well as the pledge of license, be approved.
Good. Are there any board members with questions or comments? And it looks like everybody's on mute. Mr. Healy.
I'm just unmuting, anticipating a potential motion and vote. I don't have any questions.
No questions.
So the people that will be, like Mr. Patel, as their, could you, I guess, speak to past experience that he may have in this business?
Yes, he has had other package stores. He's gotten rid of most of them. The Sun, I'm talking about the Sun that's going to be taking over. Yeah, he has had experience in a couple of stores. He also has had experience in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire. He has gotten rid of the other stores in Massachusetts, except one down in Taunton. No, actually, he's not the manager on that either.
Okay.
He has ownership in it, but no, not manager. But he has managed stores for many years, really.
And again, is knowledgeable of the laws with respect to sales and consequences thereof for not complying with that?
Yes, totally. And he is tips trained.
Okay.
A couple of questions, if I may, Brian.
Go ahead, Sam.
Mr. Patel's nephew does not have experience in this business, is that correct?
No, he does also. As a matter of fact, he has a license in Ashland.
And will he be involved in the operation management of the store as well?
Possibly, but I don't want to represent any more than he might be. I don't know, but he would be available if needed.
Okay. Are you aware of any plans to do anything different at the store with this change of management? Or continuation of the existing process and structure?
Pardon me? Yeah, I do not anticipate. Yes, I don't anticipate any changing of it. It's been owned by the family for quite a number of years.
Right, understand. Okay, that's all I had in mind.
Okay. Any other questions from board members? Seeing none, as this is a public hearing, I'm going to request if there are any attendees that are here to speak on behalf of this action. If you could raise your hand to be recognized. And I'm not seeing that any other attendees are here to speak on behalf of this. So I will move that we close the public hearing for this.
Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor of closing the public hearing? Shay, aye.
Stivers, aye.
Kalenda, aye.
Ratio I.
Healy, aye.
Okay. And is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the application by BKP Inc., DBA Fitzgerald General Store as submitted.
Second,
Moved, seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Shay, aye.
Stivers,
Ratio
aye.
I.
Kalenda, aye.
Healy, aye.
It passes. All right. Mr. Perlman, congratulations and best of luck and hope the business
Thank you, Roger.
continues to be
You didn't
successful.
You didn't test my inability to use the computer. I appreciate that.
That's because we're worried about our own ability.
Yeah.
I've got my secretary on speakerphone and my wife by nearby in case I needed help.
All right. Very good.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Take
Thank you.
care, sir.
Next item, I think we're a couple of minutes before our next scheduled hearing at 6:45 PM. Mark, want to go to Mr. Stearns?
There's a red leave meeting on the bottom. Oh, you got it.
Oh, leave meeting. Okay, thanks.
So there we go. Mark, can we move? Brian, you here with us?
I'm here.
Excellent, thank you. So the next appointment that we have is Mr. Stearns, Veterans Agent, for a discussion on Memorial Day observances. Mr. Stearns, I guess if you could give us an update on where you see observances heading in light of the COVID situation.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Shea, and hello, everybody. I'm actually at the town hall. I'm still in the old mode, but I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, you can.
I did meet with the Secretary of the Department of Veteran Services on the 23rd of April and asked that he provide a statewide guidance on the upcoming Memorial Day parades and ceremonies throughout the state. His response was there should be no traditional Memorial Days this year and ceremonies this year due to the social distancing policies enacted by the governor. Now, most of the other towns are abiding by that. Marlborough has canceled everything. Hudson has canceled the parade, but we are having a small non-public ceremony that's going to be recorded on Access TV, local Access TV, so people can view it there. We recognize that the school closures and the youth groups and the local citizens are a big part of the parades, and it'd be substantially minimized and unwise to proceed under current conditions. So what was suggested was having a local TV recording from the Board of Selectmen and the Memorial Day Chair or Veteran Service Officer at the All Wars Memorial to its veterans and its citizens. Getting on with the flags in the cemeteries, it was also suggested that if you could not buy the flags due to logistical supply issues, transportation whatsoever, then it wasn't necessary to put flags in at the cemeteries until you could actually do it. I disagreed with that. I said, well, I think we can do it. I think that if I have to do it, I'll do it myself. And I spoke with Mr. Wynot earlier today, and he has purchased flags. We don't have an issue with flags. And I explained to him that I feel that this is extremely important to the families of the deceased veterans, and we can accomplish this safely by ourselves or, with one or two of our volunteers. But no children, no volunteer scouts or programs such as that. The other thing is, and this gets a little away from the Memorial Day, but it's the national state cemeteries, national and the state cemeteries, as well as local cemeteries. They're not having honors burials at this time, except for the U.S. Army. So if it was a U.S. Army component service member, then we can still get an Army service honor guard for the funeral. However, if it's any other service at this time, they're postponing those. So that being said, Steve and I did talk today, and we, kind of thought about it, and we wanted to put forth some sort of guidance as far as maybe having a small ceremony at the memorial and have it recorded.
Mm-hmm.
One or two small speeches and the reading of the names and the raising of the flags. And he's trying to get a bugler for taps. And I'm not sure if he's going to do the 21 gun salute. Not over the top, but still a rather nice ceremony for what we can do at this time.
Okay.
And I leave it to you for suggestions.
I'll just speak for myself. Anything at all that we can do to be supportive of that and to do, the most that we can to recognize this observance. Certainly there's been a number of other events recently, Easter Passover services, others, and, you can't cancel those. Those come, and you can't cancel Memorial Day, in my opinion, but, I think it still deserves an observance, and it's going to have to be, unfortunately, a different type of observance than what we've been accustomed to, unfortunately. I would love to, it's disappointing that, it was always good to see the ever increasing crowds that would start even on Friday nights to come and help and place flags at the grave sites of veterans. It seems like, as each year went by, more and more people got involved in doing that. And, I'd hope, something, even if it's at a smaller scale than what's happened in the past, that can continue. And, I just say, whatever we can do to help support, the ideas that you and Steve and others, may have coming up with, I think, I'd like to support as much as possible.
Hey, Brian, it's Dan. So thank you for the work that you've been doing on this. And, as you and I and Steve have communicated, we definitely want to do something that respects our war dead, and at the same time ensures that we remain physically distant in whatever that we decide to do. So to my understanding, there's no prohibition, there's no state prohibition on, for instance, veterans getting together in their town and being distant, physically distant, a recommended amount, but still doing something honoring those who have given the ultimate sacrifice. Is that your understanding, or are you hearing something different?
It is my understanding that you can have groups of less than 10, or, as long as the social distancing outside, and I think we can control that. Whereas a parade we couldn't control. There's going to be a lot of people want to be out, and like Mr. Shea said, there's been a lot more people year after year. It's becoming a very big event again, as it should be. And with the parades, I can see not going over the top and having a parade, but having a small ceremony. I think we can manage that. I truly believe we can manage that. And the support for Memorial Day has been great. And I know that in future years that the parades and the ceremonies and the honors for our service members will continue and grow. But for this year, I think that we can still do a small service, have it recorded so people can see it, and it'll play longer than the Memorial Day itself.
And then, Brian, is there any prohibition from the state on whether or not the veterans would be able to march themselves, again, being physically distant, being able to march themselves down Main Street with a police escort and maybe a couple of cars, or a Jeep with some of our older veterans riding that way?
It's just a suggestion. It's not a prohibition. I think that if you wanted to do any type of parade, it should be vehicular. Because once you get people walking around and seeing each other and talking, then you kind of go against that social distancing. If it were me alone, I would say everybody meet at Town Hall and walk down to the memorial.
So why would let me just take that a bit further. Why would a walk of a tenth of a mile be okay, but a walk of a half a mile not be okay?
Either one's okay.
Okay. All right. So we'll continue to have those discussions about what the veterans would like to do. And I think we can easily do something that is respectful, but also mindful of the situation that we're in, and that does not encourage crowds to come out.
Yeah, and I think that's the main,
Sorry,
I think that's the main thing too, is that if people start marching and people are used to coming out for the parade, and the restrictions are in until May 18th as of this point, I think that people will start gathering and join the parade. That's my only concern. And then at that point, to control that is more of an issue if you get a larger crowd.
I would just like to say that I will support whatever the veterans think is appropriate and what they would like to do.
Thank you, Lisa. You've always been, you know, a full supportive of our military and our deployed troops, of course, with your care package drives, which I will never forget. And I'm a proud recipient of some of that. So, and that's, Brian, another question. Would town officials, most of the time, you know, we do have town officials, we do have our state representative who comes every time. Most of our Board of Selectmen comes, not all, but you know, in the event that board members wanted to come, in the event that Carolyn Dykema wanted to come and again remain physically distant, you know, is there any prohibition on those individuals being in the general area?
No, again, I don't believe there's going to be a prohibition. It's just that it was suggested by the secretary that a parade should not occur. And most towns are taking the stand of, okay, what about a service? And I think that if we're looking at a parade down the street, it's going to gather more people than walking the 1/10 of a mile from town hall down to the memorial.
Right.
Or,
I think,
I guess
back to the town hall.
my view on
I
this,
think it's public. I think it's public perception more than anything that we're also going to have to, you know, consider that with everything that's going on, is a parade appropriate at this time, even though it's Memorial Day. I'm not against the parade. I'm just saying that is it something that we should do or we shouldn't do, considering as our surrounding communities.
yeah, this is Marty Huey. Brian, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good.
My view on this is that there's two sort of competing interests, and one is the Memorial Day function and everything that represents. And I don't think there's anybody, certainly I'm not somebody who has anything but respect for the individuals who would be marching in that, for families who are affected and otherwise. That's the one side. The other side is whatever the number is from the governor is and by number I mean the size of gatherings. And if it remains at 10, then I think, and we leave it to the veterans to come up with who the 10 people are. But I don't think inviting anybody beyond that is appropriate. And I think the town, we as the Board of Selectmen in the town, should send that message that even if it's us that are excluded, which is entirely a possibility, is that you know, given the circumstances we find ourselves in, that's something we have to live with. And that if the governor's number on Memorial Day is no gathering more than 10, then no more than 10 people are at the memorial. I think otherwise sends a really bad message that somehow there can be exceptions. And as compelling as Memorial Day is, I don't think it should be an exception to whatever the rule is on Memorial Day. I think it's important for us to send that message.
I agree, Marty. This is Sam, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Healy. Yeah, and that's kind of putting it into a good perspective as far as what they're looking at from different towns. The public image, of course, is if you have 30, 40, 50 people marching down the street for Memorial Day under a pandemic, then what kind of message does that send? I'm all for parades and I'm all for Memorial Day and Veterans Day. That's what I do. I love it. I enjoy it. And I love to see the people. It's just under the certain circumstances that I think that we can do something that is appropriate and has full meaning and it gets to the public without having a parade.
Brian, I wish we had 30, 40, 50 people that would march in a parade. We have, I think as veterans, we usually have about, we top out at maybe 6, 7, or 8 who are able to walk anymore. So, now, Marty, your point is very well taken. I mean, we're not going to do something. We may be, knucklehead Army, Navy, Air Force, but, we're not going to, we're not going to do something that just makes us look like knuckleheads. We're going to do something that is appropriate, that follows the guidance of our of the Commonwealth, as well as our elected town leaders.
All right. So certainly as it stands, we know the governor's order is in place through May 18th currently. And our next scheduled meeting is the 19th. And there either will or will not be further guidance from the governor by the time we meet again. I think before we, decide on anything official now, I think we ought to at least maybe hold off till our next meeting. And at that point, take another look at where we stand with respect to, guidance from the governor and executive orders from the governor, and go from there. But certainly, I think it's going to be a much different observance this year than it has been in the past, unfortunately.
And I'm more than willing to put together a couple different scenarios for that next meeting.
Yep. Okay. That sounds good. All right. Any other questions, comments for Mr. Stearns?
Not from me. Thanks very much, Brian.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Brian,
Brian,
thank
for
you for
coming.
joining.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. And sorry we missed you at the townhouse. We'll meet again. I'm sure sometime soon enough.
I got the parking spot all to myself.
All right.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, let's move next to the public hearing 6:40 that's scheduled for 6:45 p.m. National Grid petition for manhole and duct locations, Deerfoot Road and 84 Main Street. Mr. Purple.
Mr. Chairman, the Southborough Board of Selectmen shall hold a public hearing on Tuesday, May 5th, 2020 at 6:45 p.m. in a virtual meeting to consider a request for permission by Mass Electric Company, National Grid, to locate manholes, wires, and ducts, including the necessary sustaining and protecting fixtures along and across the public way at Deerfoot Road, to install pole box off of pole 3, install conduit from pole 3 to pole box, then to transformer pad at 84 Main Street. The meeting may be viewed by the public through a link located at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings, Southborough Board of Selectmen.
Very good. So hearing is open. Is there somebody from National Grid? I presume that's Chris that's on our group of panelists.
Good afternoon. My
Thank
name is
you.
Chris
Welcome.
DeFazio, and I am here from National Grid. Everything that Mr. Purple said is correct. We will be installing a pole box with a conduit system over to a transformer at 84 Main Street on Deerfoot Road.
Very good. And do you have a schedule for when this work is anticipated to take place?
No, at the moment I do not.
Okay. I would just note, if you could coordinate with our DPW superintendent on this, there will be pickup of, we are doing work on Main Street for reconstruction of that roadway. So if you could just coordinate with her so that the schedule for your work and contractors' work doesn't conflict with other ongoing work that may take place on Main Street itself.
Okay.
Any of the board members with questions or comments?
I have
Just a question. Sir, very quickly, how elaborate work is this? Is this a half-day thing, a full-day thing, a few days? How long is this going to take?
It should take about a day's worth of work. It's just running in total with the restoration of the pavement and everything. It could be a few days worth of work in total, between digging up and installing the conduit and then repairing each section of the pavement.
And the pavement will be on Deerfoot or Main Street?
Deerfoot.
Okay. All right. I'm all set.
All right. Thank you.
I had a question.
Yes.
Chris, this is Sam Stivers. You talk about digging a trench there. How wide is this trench in the pavement that they're going to have to dig and then repair? Is it like 6 inches wide or several feet?
We'll be installing 2 4-inch concrete encased conduits, so it could be about 2 feet wide roughly.
Okay. And then you repave and whatever according to
Yes.
DPW requirements.
Yes.
Okay. That's it. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Other questions from the board? And again, whereas this is a public hearing, if there are any people who are attendees who have signed on to offer a comment. Looks like Mr. Webb. So Mr. Webb, you're on mute right now, but I guess if you could just state your name and address and your question, please.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Edward Webb, 1 Deerfoot Road. Just a very quick question. Thank you. I'm the abutting neighbor across the street. Two questions. One, where and what type of pull box are we talking about being located? Is it going to be underground, and how close to the pole? And I'm curious if there'll be an impact on, my fence goes pretty tight to that side of the road right there as well. And then the second question would be, where on 84 Main Street property is the transformer being located?
All right. The first question for the pole box, it'll be a couple of feet off of pole 3. They're about 2 feet by maybe 3 feet. It'll go underground. It'll have a cover over it. And for the second question, the transformer location, there's going to be a driveway with a shed located directly across from pole 3, and the transformer will be located right there along Deerfoot Road.
Okay, so the transformer, basically where the, right next to what is the carriage house now, where the current meter is, kind of in that spot?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's and sorry, Chris, one last thing. As far as the installation of the pole box going in underground, do you anticipate that impacting on my side at all, the fence getting in the way or anything in that area?
No, I do not believe so. I can double check. I do have your name and your address. I can double check and reach out if there's going to be any concern with that.
Yeah, that'd be great. And if possible, I know it's kind of tough. If you could just give me a heads up when you're about to start the work, that would be great.
Of course. Yes.
Super. Thank you.
Mr. Shea, if I may, for Mr. Webb before he leaves. Mr. Webb, if you go into the Selectmen's packet online, there's actually a map of where the pole box and the transformer are going to be located.
Right. I had a look at that, Ms. Braccio. I just wanted to kind of get a better idea since it's not to scale.
Okay, fine. I just wanted to make sure you had all the information.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. Thank you for your comment. Anybody else who is joining as an attendee with questions or comments for National Grid? Not seeing any. I will make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, Shea, aye.
Stivers, aye.
Healy, aye.
Ratio I.
Oop. Your aye as well, Dan? I missed it if you said it. Dan, can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Right, I'm catching about 1 out of every 10 words.
Okay. So I'm sorry, did you have any questions?
No questions for me.
All right, so there was a motion to close the public hearing. You in favor of that?
Yes.
So we are all in favor of closing the public hearing. With that, is there a motion?
I move to approve National Grid's petition as submitted.
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, Shea, aye.
Stivers,
Healy,
aye.
aye.
Ratio I. We gotta get these eyes down.
We should do it in
I heard all
alphabetical
five.
order, or reverse alphabetical order or something.
I heard all 5 say aye. So that is approved.
Thank you.
We are on to our next item on the agenda, Mr. Ballantyne, fiscal year 2021 budget update.
You didn't
Brian,
say the
welcome.
most exciting item tonight, Brian. How are you all? I hope everyone is well.
Doing well.
Hey, Brian.
So far, so good.
Good. Okay, so I'll run through this. I don't think it'll take too long. We're not going to get in the weeds tonight. However, we do want to provide you with a little status of where we are. As far as revenues and expenses, nothing's really changed since we last spoke. You know, as far as local aid, local receipts. I will say just one little nugget. Through yesterday, we collected about 8.5 million of our real estate taxes, which is actually a positive sign. It's about 80, a little over 80%. We were lucky enough to receive our escrow services, which Selectman Stivers had brought an issue to the town administrator and myself about escrow services, maybe not paying until January, that'd be something, until June 1st, because they, or at least in some communities, they are holding it, and I think for their own benefit. But I was able to track down the escrow contacts and put a little pressure and maybe a little guilt, and I'm sure they're getting a lot of complaints from some other communities. So happy to say that worked out well. So that's the update as far as that. There'll be more to come on that, as you know, the next 2 or 3 months, as I said. So last meeting, we came away with an exercise to do a 2% and a 0% tax increase on the budgets. Very happy to say all the departments, the school committee still needs to meet about this, so that's the exception. However, all the other departments responded and did a great job. I want to thank them. It's not a pleasant experience. The 2% was an interesting exercise to see how some of the departments handled that. The 0%, unfortunately, I have to warn you, when you do see it, it's kind of ugly. There's a lot of loss of services and you know, a good amount of staff that would be cut back. So we'll have more to come on that, but you know, I'll just give you a heads up. When we did the exercise, we basically apportioned the amount that we needed to get down to across every department. That's an easy way of doing it. It's a little bit of an inequity on some departments. Some departments who had new hours, we still use that component of that 260,000 of new hours and services to begin this exercise with. So some departments were able to simply cut back their new requests. So it was fairly easy. I don't want to say easy, but it was easier for them. Some departments just don't have the ability to cut back like that. So there's a little bit of a disconnect on some departments. They're going to be hurting right off the bat, and others not so much. So we will obviously communicate that to you a little more in detail as we go along too. And the other thing that to keep in mind is we exempted some departments. Mr. Stearns was just on. The Veterans Department, we felt, or the Veterans budget, we felt was a budget that shouldn't be subject to this. I think the board would probably agree with that. And there's the small ones. I think there's a handful that are under 2,000 or under 2,500. A little bit pointless to cut them $10 or $5 or $20. So we exempted them also. And you'll see that when we distribute this. So the departments did a great job. I think there was a tendency among some departments to preserve their staff at all costs. And if this is an actual exercise or something we may actually do, they have to be aware that, you know, this may be a multi-year environment that we're in. So I think the town administrator and myself will be following up with certain departments just to make sure that, you know, their long-term planning is probably where we want it to be. So we'll do that. As far as the new hires and the new money in the budget, and I say this because it's sort of, as the town administrator and myself have been talking about this, We batted around some ideas, and I think it would be a good idea for the board to consider if these new hours and positions are still put forth at town meeting, to possibly freeze them until January 1st. I think it's obvious why, because we have a fall town meeting, and that gives us the ability of not hiring someone on July 1st and saying, boy, things were a lot worse in September, October. We gotta separate. We gotta lay someone off or separate them, or that's not a good situation. So I think that's something the board should consider. You don't have to make a decision tonight, but I would strongly recommend that. It kind of makes a lot of sense. As far as the budget goes itself, one of the last things I'll talk about is the capital. We're considering maybe moving some of the capital to next year, some of the items that make sense to. The capital committee, or the new capital committee, has been meeting quite frequently, and they've done a lot of great work so far. A lot of communication with the departments. It's going really well. So I think possibly by the end of this week, they may have a solid recommendation to make as far as the timing of what to have in the spring, what to have in the fall, and what to possibly put off till next year. And that could be significant, because there's 2 or 3 things that we're thinking of, and it amounts to $130,000 or so. So that's going to make a difference to at least assist us for this year. Keeping in mind that, yes, next year we're going to have to deal with those items. but that's going to be something at our next meeting, or our next in-depth discussion about this, we can talk about too, and have a much better update. So that should be coming soon. I think that's most of what I wanted to hit on. I mean, it's just a quick update to see where we are, and to see what to expect. I think one of the next things the board wants to do is probably schedule when you'd like to meet with the town administrator and myself, and sort of get into this a little more deeply. But that's the overall update. It went well. Like I said, it's not easy. I do thank all departments, and it's a little bit of an anxiety-inducing exercise to do, but it was very good. They did a good job.
Okay. Right. Any questions for Mr. Ballantyne?
I do, please.
Actually, start with Lisa.
Just Brian, again, thank you for what you and Mark have done to do this exercise. And I'm just curious, how much longer do you think before we can actually see some of the results of this? I know you say soon, but is soon before our next meeting, so that potentially it might be worthwhile? I mean, town meeting is coming quicker than we anticipate. So obviously I want us to have time to be able to go over the information you provide, and if there is any amendments or changes for town meeting, that we have time to enact on that.
So I think.
Yeah, I would think in the next. Oh, go ahead.
No, you first.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay.
No,
so
I was just going to say, I would think within the next week,
All right.
we could have some information.
Brian answer first. Then we'll go to Mark, then Sam. Brian, go.
Okay, so yeah, my thing's hesitating a little bit too, so that's why we're falling over each other. So I think within the next week we'll have information. We have most of it. We just wanted to give the school committee, since they're such a big part of this, a chance to have a response. And again, waiting for that capital planning group to make their recommendations, which is Friday, by the way. It should be Friday. So within a week.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, you had follow on to that?
Just something quickly. I agree with Brian. I think that the board may look at a special meeting for Monday to be able to start to put some of these pieces together. Again, if capital does what they intend to do on Friday. However, capital being a separate piece of it, I think that within the next couple of days, maybe by Thursday of this week, Brian and I could probably share with you the results of what the department's budgets broad brush are going to look like, what things are going to be lost. I do think that there are a couple of things, and Brian alluded to it, where departments kind of sacrificed some of their expenses in order to preserve staff. One of the caveats that we added in this exercise was, if you're cutting something, if you're eliminating something, don't assume that you're going to be able to put it back next year. You have to assume that it may be something that you won't get back into your budget for several fiscal years, 2 or 3 at the most. And so when we got some of the results back, Brian and I took a look and said, I think there may be some conversation that needs to be had about how this was crafted. There may be an opportunity here that may be missed, something along those lines. So I think we just need to do some follow-up with that, but I think we can begin sharing some of that stuff with you later this week, so you can get a comfort level and maybe start asking some questions of us before we have a formal meeting.
Okay. All right. Then Mr. Stivers had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Brian, you touched on a point that the question mark for me is the schools. Obviously a big piece of the total town budget. I'm trying to figure out what impact the current pandemic has on their expenditures here. For example, transportation, kids aren't riding the school buses now, lunches, those kind of things. Special ed, I understand, has been disrupted, although I don't know how and to what degree. So I'm interested in it. Maybe it turns out that it's more expensive for them given this than less expensive. I just don't know. It would be helpful, I think, to understand what kind of pressure is coming from that direction as well. If they expect to have higher costs from this or lower cost, does that give us any useful information? And you say they're addressing it soon here. That would be very helpful. Do you think they're going to have a fairly firm fix within the next week or so?
So we've given them the same guidelines, the same bottom line. Brian provided all the departments, including the school. Here's the bottom line that you need to work to in order to achieve a 2% tax increase budget, and the same thing for a 0% increase budget. I've had the conversations with the superintendent, and he said, the school intends to lay out what that would mean for them should they do it. Obviously, they don't want to do that he doesn't want to do that publicly without the school committee first having a view of what that's going to look like. Now, to your question, Sam, I think that there's kind of some pros and some cons, for the school being remote. As you said, they're not incurring transportation, they're not incurring, some other costs. They're also not getting facility rentals and things of that, that kind of revenue in that they would expect. And they're spending an awful lot of money, I think, on technology, and I'm sure Zoom accounts, like everybody is, to facilitate the remote learning. So I'm sure there's a ledger sheet. As you can see, we're saving here, but we're expending here. And I can get those answers, as to how we look for fiscal 20. But again, some of those things that we're spending money on for remote learning now, I think there has to be, some kind of plan in place should we have to continue those for a period of time. The question is how long. So, 21's budget is going to be a bit of a roller coaster. One other thing that Brian had said in terms of delaying any new staff hires until January 1, we're going off of what we know right now from the state in terms of local aid, which really isn't a whole lot. And all the information that Brian and Vanessa and I get back from our spies, at the state level, is that the state doesn't know when they're going to give us any good numbers. So we may do a budget in June and the numbers may come in, we can handle worse, but we can't handle a lot worse. And so if we're having a special in the fall, we may have to take this budget back and make some additional changes to it. And we don't want to hire new people and have them there for 4 months and then be eliminating them, 4 months after we just bring them in. So I think that just makes good sense until we get a better handle on some of the state revenues.
Yeah, and I understand, I agree with that. I don't know what the answer might be, but I think it'd be very helpful to figure out as best we can what we think the impact on schools is, and then what relationship does that have to our pressures going forward. Thanks.
Other questions for Brian or Mark?
Thanks, Brian. Not a question, just I guess an observation, and that is that the thing we most know right now is that we don't know a whole lot about what July 1, 2020 to June 30, 2021 is going to look like. You know, we don't know if the school's going to be in session in September. They may be. They may be in a completely different way than they have been in previous years. There's just so much we don't know. Mark, you referenced the possibility, and we're pretty certain we're going to have a fall town meeting for. It seemed pretty certain beforehand, but I think it's more than just a safe bet at this point. And in your report, Brian, so I guess this is turning into a question. My view, I guess, is to be as minimalist as possible. And by that, I mean, however much we can put off in terms of final decisions, whether it's from a personnel standpoint or otherwise. That's why I think the idea of January 1 to start rather than at the beginning of the fiscal year makes an awful lot of sense, just because there's so much we don't know right now. And for instance, one thought I had is there a way, I mean, there's an awful lot in the budget that isn't personnel related, that maybe is training related, that maybe is travel related in various budgets. Is there a way to essentially strip all of that out for our budget consideration as of the town meeting, and then address it in October, for instance, when we have a better idea of what things look like from a state aid, local aid standpoint and otherwise. Again, it just is very worrisome to not know stuff as simple as what are the local aid numbers going to look like. Again, my view is the more minimalist we can be in terms of baking things in at the annual town meeting, the safer ground we're going to be on. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's sort of a question, but it's more an observation in terms of the way I'm going to look at the numbers that you generate for us in the next week or 10 days, whenever it is.
Yeah, and you know that just a quick answer. Is it feasible? Probably. Is it something we really want to do? I'm not sure. I can think of minuses and pluses to that, but well, we can certainly have that discussion. But yes, the basic answer to your question is we could do it. I think we'd have to think it through a little more, but yeah, you know, I get your point though.
And by it, you mean delay decisions on things to a second town meeting as opposed to the annual town meeting? Is that the it you were talking
Correct.
about? Okay.
Correct. Yeah, in reference to your training and travel and all that, it could be done. It might be a little messy, but the answer is yes, it's feasible.
Marty, to that point, the one thing I think we want to be careful of, I would be more in favor of, you know, of passing a budget in June that includes those items and then having the board freeze those items, you know, and not expending them, because if you strip everything out and you give a lower budget and then trying to put those things back in, you know, is going to be very difficult. I think that, you know, the board should be looking at priorities, you know, once we have a budget in June, and then trying to determine what things, you know, that if we have to do more to this budget, what are the things that we want to preserve? What are the things that, you know, that we want to take out, and whether it's a global decision or it's a department by department decision. So don't strip it too bad, you know, because you'll never, you know, it'll take a long time to try to get it built back up again.
No, Mark, that's a great point. And again, it's not stripping for stripping's sake. It's what gives us the most flexibility. And when you just referenced about a freeze, the only thing I would want in that instance is for us to be very clear to, you know, all concerned throughout town government that the fact that a budget was approved at annual town meeting doesn't eliminate the possibility that various expenditures might have to be frozen sometime during the course of the fiscal year.
And I think that has to be said. I think the board needs to be very clear that the budget we pass today may not be the budget we live with for 12 months. It may be a budget that we live with for 4 months, you know, so tread very carefully. You know, if you remember, you know, I believe 2008, Brian, The last time we went through something like this, we ended up going through half of a fiscal year before the governor decided to slash local aid, which then doubled the impact of it on communities, which required, cities and towns to lay off dozens of people just to get to those new revenue numbers. So we want to make sure we're not assuming we can do certain things until we're sure that that we're going to have the revenue there to back them up.
Fair enough.
And I think too, Marty, I'm curious when we get the 0% and the 2%, I think that may answer some of the questions and the concerns that you have. I'm also looking forward to seeing it for those very reasons. We may be very shell shocked when it comes back to us with the numbers that they're going to give us.
I mean, I'll give you two numbers. The 0 and Brian, like I said, I want to, I thank all the departments as Brian did, for putting in the time and effort for this, but Brian also did a great job putting it together in something readable that you'd be able to go through and kind of distill from it, I think, what you need to. Just two numbers. In the 2% budget reduction, there's going to be an overall reduction of about 1,100 staff hours in the fiscal year. In the 0%, that increases to almost 6,600 staff hours that'll be reduced across all departments. So just gives you an idea of, by just going that 2%, it's going to mean, we're going to be cutting into personnel and programs, pretty deep. So, maybe I shouldn't have given you those two numbers, but it without giving you anything behind it, but I think to Brian's point, it does, it is going to be a little bit of a shock to the system for some of these things, but I do think it's a good exercise. I think it's good to see what it will take for us to get there, given where we are right now.
Yep. All right, so Brian and Mark, you'll get this information to the board. You're going to distribute this to advisory as well for their information?
Yes, we will distribute it to, the selectmen will get it first, and then we will distribute it to advisory as well.
All right, and then so we can see if we need to schedule additional meetings to be ready for town meeting. And then we'll go from there. All right, any other questions, comments? Which then brings us to...
Brian, there is a resident who raised their hand. Mrs. Malinowski.
Chelsea, is that you? If you could just state your name, address. You're on mute right now.
Okay. Hi, Chelsea Malinowski, 1 William Caleri Lane. I just had a question on the freezing of certain items. So if we do freeze them in the fall, then does that go into free cash and it's tied up for the next year?
If we froze them and we actually passed it at the budget, so we basically have two choices. We could keep the money in there, and you're right, it would go to free cash, or we could revote the budgets at a lower amount, and then that would be that.
I would suggest that we would lower the budgets. We would revote the budgets at a new lower number, because otherwise the residents are going to have to pay, the taxes are going to be set at the higher number. So I would think that it would make more sense we would be reducing the budgets at a fall town meeting should the revenue numbers come in from the state that don't support what we did in June.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. So that brings us to Mr. Semino. Paul, can you hear us okay? You are also on mute if you are there.
All right, I'm off mute.
We can hear you. Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
All right. So our appointment with Mr. Semino, discussion of critical articles and date for spring town meeting. So the date for spring town meeting, you have indicated that you will set. I guess And just to follow up, at our last meeting, we had a discussion about what our board would consider to be critical articles that we would want to see move forward at the town meeting when it was held, and a listing of others that we would recommend to be postponed until a later date, to a fall town meeting, as we've been discussing. So then, as a follow-up to our last meeting, Mr. Purple, you've put together a suggested list of critical articles, if you will say, for us to consider. You've distributed that to Mr. Semino as well, as I understand.
Yes, I have.
All right. So Paul, I guess if you just want to start on the date, and then we can have a discussion on those articles.
Okay. So the date has been set, announced last week, based on the governor's latest guidance from last week. We moved town meeting out to Saturday, June 13th. And that's been, that word has been disseminated through town forums, the website, Twitter, et cetera. FYI, the plan, we are planning, when I say we, myself and much more substantially, the town clerk, whose job it is to put this rodeo together in terms of logistics, have a plan in place to conduct town meeting with appropriate protocols, if indeed we're still in that mode on June 13th, in the gym at Trottier. There's space in the entirety of the gym. When all the nets and the wrestling mats and everything are out of the way, we can fit a quorum of 100 plus in the gym with appropriate distancing, aisle widths, room for Sam, room for the selectmen and the advisory and town council and the clerk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's tight, but when I say it's tight, it was tight getting 100 plus into those, and meet all those other criteria that public safety requires. But Mr. Haggerty figured it out. There will be some expense associated with that is not typical of town meeting conducted in the auditorium. Logistically, in terms of chairs, in terms of cabling that's running back to the control room at the auditorium, et cetera. We can't say for sure that it will be necessary to do it that way. I think we would be foolish not to plan on doing it that way, and so we are. And I know Mr. Haggerty has a speaking role in this meeting later in the agenda, so I'll leave questions about logistics to him. I'll hang on in case there's questions. But Saturday, June 13, 1 p.m. Is the date and time for annual town meeting for this year. I did receive, moving on to the discussion of critical articles. And just to reiterate, the predicate for this discussion is the idea that as much as we can put off until fall to shorten the duration of the meeting, perhaps that is the ideal way to approach the meeting. As always, how to dispose of every article on the warrant will be up to the voters. But what we're here to discuss tonight is what will we ask of the voters in terms of an abbreviated list of articles that need to be taken up on June 13th versus that can wait until fall. Mr. Purple did provide me with feedback that you all came to agreement on in terms of the overall warrant. I made a couple of suggestions. Yes, sir.
Just to be clear, Mark put that together. We have yet to formally act on that listing.
Fair enough.
That has been the recommendation that Mark has made to our board.
Yeah, I suppose we should have this discussion before you do that. And I can tell you that I agreed with everything that I was presented, and actually suggested to Mr. Purple, and he agrees that we add a couple of things to it. As I see it, if the town meeting voters agree to indefinitely postpone the articles, I'm sorry, that agree to pass by consent the list of articles that I suggest we'll present, and agree to indefinitely postpone the suggested list of articles that we suggest get indefinitely postponed, what you'll be left with is only 7 what we're calling critical articles to actually take up seriatim one at a time. Okay. Mark, let me know if you disagree, but that's how I see the chart right now. Again, if we pass the consent agenda and the indefinitely postponed group that I'm going to suggest we offer, we'll be left with 7 individual articles to debate and vote on. Mark, do you agree with that?
So, Paul, generally, yes. I think that there are, I believe, 18 articles that I recommended to the selectmen and then forwarded to you as critical that we need to do in order to get the fiscal year running on July 1st. I think that of those articles, there's probably 7 that we do need to probably discuss. They would not go on a consent agenda because I think that they would need some conversation, and that there may be another couple of articles that you may consider outside of the critical articles that you could add to a consent agenda. The one thing that is going to be the decision I think the board and you, Paul, need to discuss is, do you want to indefinitely postpone these other articles, or do you want to postpone them to a date and time certain? So
Does
that
anyone else to hear Mark?
Yeah, I can hear Mark, Dan.
All right, maybe it must have been just me. I was not able to hear much of what he said.
Sorry, Dan.
No.
But I do have a question based on what I think you said.
Well, let Mark finish and then I'll go to you, Dan, okay?
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So basically, I think we just need to decide procedurally, Paul, are we indefinitely postponing, which would then, basically allow you to dissolve the warrant, or are you going to postpone to a date and time certain? And as I'm saying this, in order for the articles that we do vote on to take effect, it may be necessary for us to indefinitely postpone those other articles and then repost a whole new warrant so that we can then act on the ones that we have taken, that we've taken up and decided.
To address that, or do you want to go to Dan?
So Paul, why don't you offer an answer to that, and then I'll go to
Okay.
Dan right after that.
I'll quickly say that I think procedurally, Mark, the sort of favored process is to indefinitely postpone. Postponing to a date certain. I would say, as a practical matter, we don't even have a date certain yet in terms of a fall town meeting. So indefinitely postponing and then issuing a new warrant that includes those articles would be certainly would be my recommendation.
Can I just jump in real quick? And Paul, you may be more aware of this than I am, but there was an update from Representative Dykman's office today about legislation that I think has passed both the House and the Senate.
If it's about the quorum, Marty, it has not passed both yet. I think we're premature on that.
Marty, does that question relate to the quorum issue and the changing of the quorum?
It relates to the changing of the quorum and if you change the quorum, specifically, it limits the warrant articles you are able to vote on.
Correct.
At a revised town meeting.
So as far as I know, that has been passed. Action has been taken by the Senate on that. Action is still required by the House and the governor's signature. So that's premature at this point. It may come into play, it may not come into play. And I think if it does come into play, we'll have to take that up separately once language is finalized. That would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Mr. Kalenda, you had a question, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Shea. So I don't know if I have the procedure down exactly just yet, so I'm hoping I can get some clarity on this. So if we were to, do we request that, are we able ourselves to indefinitely postpone and only put forward those critical articles that we believe are necessary to run the town? Or is that up to town meeting? Is that presented at the very start of the meeting? And the reason why I'm asking is that there are citizens petitions. I don't know how that plays in, if we have that ability. There also is, I believe, a very, what is looking like is going to be a very controversial article, and that is the illumination bylaw. And there are many that want to participate. I have seen the emails I think this board has of those in particular with Southborough Little League that believe that it is part of that is, you know, an attempt to ensure that lights never go up at Finn, even though that was passed at you know, a town meeting quite a while ago. So I think that is going to be a very important article for many residents, and we could see a lot of people. So are we able to indefinitely postpone, or does that have to happen at the meeting?
So the short, I'll do it a short and a long version. The short version is it has to happen at the meeting.
All right, so we are gonna, then that's enough then, because there is a large group that is going to come if that particular article is gonna go forward.
So Paul, if I'm gonna just jump in here, because so Mr. Semino and I had talked about this. And I think that, you know, part of the reason that I requested that Mark put together this list of critical items was to get our board hopefully unanimous in support of that concept, but then also publicize the fact that at town meeting, it would be our intent to make a motion that we would only be acting on this priority list of articles, and that we would then make a motion that the other articles not on that priority list would be our board's unanimous recommendation, hopefully, to indefinitely postpone those articles in an effort that people came to the town meeting, hopefully supportive of that as well, just so that we're not conducting a town meeting that would require more people than would attend that may not be comfortable in attending. I just want to have us publicize the fact that we want to have a streamlined town meeting, take care of the critical items to get us into FY21, recognize that the other articles are controversial or more controversial by nature, are deserving of public debate, and let's hold off until a later date when we can conduct that public debate in a more safe manner. So I think the intent would be to get the word out to everybody that our intent is to have a streamlined town meeting to conduct only the critical items, but at the end of the day, we have to get town meeting to approve that and go along with it.
But Brian, couldn't we have a meeting? The only way to avoid this scenario of having lots of people come because they don't want to, the fear is that's not going to pass, and that these articles are going to go forward, and that they're going to need to be there either in support or opposition of the ones that are most controversial. Couldn't we have a discussion with the proponents of those articles and see if they would agree in advance to indefinitely postpone at the meeting, so that at least there's a record of, okay, yes, I agree, add my consent, and then, you know, mine can be moved to the fall town meeting. At least that would then avoid having lots of people at least be in waiting if they need to suddenly come into town meeting.
So I think yes. I think that there's obviously a number of those articles that we would recommend delaying are articles that our board would sponsor. And I think it's okay. I would hope that we would be in support of postponing those indefinitely, but I think for those that our board is not the sponsor of, I was then going to have our board request that Mr. Purple reach out to the proponents of those other articles and just state, you know, this is our intent. And we hope that, you know, just so you know, that, and you're not caught by surprise at town meeting that this is going to happen, but it's our intent to have the board do this. I know in a number of instances, some proponents that aren't the board have already given feedback that they are already okay with those articles being discussed at a fall town meeting and not being taken up now. I think that some of them that require a zoning change, as an example, would need a 2/3 majority to pass. And I think it's going to be a tough challenge to get 2/3 to show up to approve those if, you know, a good number of people show up anticipating that they're only going to be taking on the critical article items. So,
But Brian, if I can, and I think Dan, I think I pretty much agree completely with Dan on this. The last thing in the world we want to avoid, the last thing in the world we want here is gamesmanship by either opponents or proponents of articles. And so in addition to reaching out and telling proponents of, I mean, obviously we can take a position on our own articles that we are going to move to indefinitely postpone, and let that be clear to everyone who's paying attention before town meeting. But I would be, my preference would be to be stronger with the proponents and say, we want you to give us an affirmative statement that you are going to move to indefinitely postpone your article at town meeting, so that as much as possible, hopefully completely, it's known before town meeting that except for the absolutely need to be done articles relating to the budget, that everybody that is a proponent of an article is going to move to indefinitely postpone their article until a fall town meeting. I just think taking uncertainty out of the equation is going to help everybody involved.
Yeah,
Completely agree, Marty.
no, I agree with
Brian,
that.
can
I guess the one thing I'll offer, and then I'll go to Paul, is, you know, a few meetings ago, as we started these Zoom meetings and all, we were talking about impacts to people in town, and Marty had made the statement that, you know, I think everybody realizes the severity of what's going on and people are going to be reasonable. And I don't have an issue at all with putting that, you know, stressing the fact that, you know, we would like a commitment from people to have their articles put off till the fall. But I think we're going to get cooperation with that. I think people are going to be reasonable in this. People fully understand what's going on. So.
I agree with you. I just, in terms of folks who might or might not come to town meeting, depending on whether or not something was going to be voted on, I think the more clarity we can have beforehand that everyone is, as you just described, on board and going to act reasonably, I think that's going to benefit everyone.
Yep, understood. All right,
Brian.
Mr. Savino.
Yeah, so just let me quickly clarify on that point, and then let me just quickly and briefly summarize how I think the sequence will go at town meeting. On the point regarding support for indefinite postponement, clearly that's better than the opposite. However, it's not dispositive, and I don't hear anybody saying that, but I just want to make sure that's clear. If a proponent, let's take the most extreme example. If the proponent of an article to the mic and says, I withdraw, I move to indefinitely postpone my own article, town meeting can defeat that motion and take it up.
Yeah.
So there's nothing guaranteed about what we're talking about. I just want to be clear about that the town meeting voters have that power. In general, the sequence, the three-part sequence as I see it. As we always, as we have with our 1 year of this process, we start with the consent agenda, and that list will be promulgated and publicized ahead of time. And we will vote on the consent agenda. And either we will, and what passes agenda will be deemed enacted. If items are pulled off the consent agenda in that first step in the process, then they go into the remaining pool of articles. Okay, so phase, let's call it 3 phases. Phase 1 is the consent agenda, and we dispose of as many things as we can. Phase 2, as I see it, would be a motion to, or motions to indefinitely postpone non-critical articles that are left after the agenda piece is done. So with any luck, we dispose of a fairly large number of articles by indefinitely postponing them and taking them up in a future one. What that would leave then is phase 3, which are the quote fingers critical articles, which, as I mentioned earlier, as I intend to propose it, would be 7. There would be critical articles left. 11 of the 18 that Mark mentioned earlier would be on the consent agenda. That's how you get, that's how the math works. I hope everybody follows that. And so if there are any questions about that, I'm happy to talk more. But that's sort of the phasing of the meeting as I see it. You know, the most logical way to approach it as I see it.
Okay.
And Paul, did you say which those 7 are?
No, but I can rattle them off real quick. The 7 critical articles that I don't think we can do by consent are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and 14. So 5 through 10 and 14. The critical articles that I think we can do by consent are 2, 3, 4, 11, 12, 13, and 15 through 18.
So that's 7 plus 11 overlapping with the 18 that Mark set out.
Correct.
Okay.
And there are a couple others I think we could do by consent that aren't critical, but we don't need to get into that now.
Okay. All right.
I'm
Any
sorry.
other questions for Paul?
You know, that didn't add up to 18. 21 is also in that second group. So critical articles to be done by consent or proposed consent. 2, 3, 4, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 21. And that's 11 total articles in that group.
Okay. All right, so I guess I will ask, is the board in favor of the list of critical articles identified by Mr. Purple?
Healy, yes.
Stivers, yes.
Brascio, yes.
Dan?
Yep.
Shay, yes, as well. All right, so you unanimously in support of that grouping. So Paul, I guess, from there, logistically, how we get through proposing them and all that, I'll leave that up to you as moderator, but just know that our board is unanimously in support of those articles being the critical ones that the town meeting should take up.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments for Mr. Semino?
Only one, Paul. I mean, have you thought about the brevity of presentations that you would be requesting to ensure that town meeting moves along briskly?
I have, and Dan, I'm going to rely, frankly, on I'm intending to rely on the reasonableness of the folks in the room at the time. And I don't have a predetermined notion what that is. What I mean by that is, if folks feel like, we're feeling now, I believe they will indefinitely postpone a huge chunk of articles so that we only have a few to take up one at a time. If for some reason that's not the case, if we are going to debate articles, I will not. I don't. Unfortunately, I don't think it's proper to debate more than we normally would. If we're going to have a town meeting, we got to have a town meeting. We can take up less, but we can't give short shrift to the ones we take up. And I'm not suggesting that you were suggesting that, but that's sort of that. In terms of my thinking, how I hope we'll approach that.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
You're welcome.
All right. Anything else? Okay. Paul, thank you very much.
All right.
And at this point, we will
Bye, guys.
see you on Saturday the 13th. All right.
Take care, Paul.
All right.
I'll hang around on offline.
All right. Ms. Brush, you're just confirming you're still intending to recuse for.
I am.
All right. So let's see if we can get through as much of the remainder of the agenda. And my thanks and appreciation to Mr. Hegarty and the registrars of voters for hanging on. I'll start with Chair's report. The only thing I wanted to mention, and it's maybe touched upon by others later, is food pantry. And just know to people in town, certainly with the extension of the stay-at-home order from the governor, if families are impacted, the food pantry is available as a resource, and certainly they are ready, willing, and able to accept donations as well. Members' reports, if folks have any.
I've got something.
Go ahead, Sam.
Just quickly, I attended the Municipal Technology Committee meeting last evening. Very interesting and helpful. And one of the things that came out that I think we ought to keep on the table for going forward is the possibility of adding Zoom capabilities to our quotes normal world going forward, because I think it's opened up, and they were commenting, opened up the ease of committee meetings in terms of getting quorums and so forth, as well as public comment in certain cases where they were looking for info from an expert, for example, who might not be a local expert. A lot easier for people to connect. So I don't think we need to turn the world on its head, but it seems to have added an interesting dimension in terms of accessibility and ease of generating full groups of committees to participate in things. And I think it's worth considering that as we transition toward a more normal, whatever that is, world going forward.
Okay. Other members?
Nothing for me.
Mr. Purple. Town Administrator report.
Mr. Chairman, just two quick items. One, along with Mrs. Hale, we are putting together a return to work working group. Obviously, once the townhouse was closed and the majority of the employees have gone remote for working, with the governor's order, hopefully changing a little bit on May 18th. I don't have great expectations that everything's coming back to some sense of normalcy on the 18th. But as we start to look to go back to the in-person from the remote, Mrs. Hale suggested, and rightfully so, we should put a working group together to try to understand what that's going to look like. And as part of that, I think it might be helpful if there was a member of the board who wanted to at least be involved in those discussions and understand what this is going to look like and give their input. The end result being that we want to put a plan together so that everybody understands how this is going to work for all staff and for the town buildings. So I will throw that out there to the board if there's anyone who's interested to want to sit in on those discussions for the board.
I'd be happy to. unless somebody else wants to.
I would just add that our first meeting is tomorrow at 2:30, if that helps at all.
That works.
All right. Everyone supportive of Lisa? Is that?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
I mean, Lisa is up for a reelection. That's the only question, but,
Well, that's true.
you know,
So
so
hopefully they'll be back to work before then, Dan.
I think so.
Yeah. Our goal will be to have a plan in place before the election, so.
All right. Any
All right,
other
that's
items, Mark?
Even better. I know there's a number of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, if you had a question.
Nope.
Mark, did you have any other items?
I had one quick item. I just wanted to, on behalf of the Recreation Director, Tim Davis, he would just again remind people about social distancing and use of the track. And I think I'll put this as nicely as possible, respecting that, you know, when some places are closed, be they the skate park, the tennis courts, we're replacing a lot of chains because people have been cutting them to access some of these facilities. You know, would just ask that people try to you know, respect, you know, what recreation, you know, is doing at this point. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Consent agenda. There are two items: approve open session minutes, April 21, 2020, and also approval of the 2019 open space and rec plan. I'm going to request that we act on these separately, and I will move that we approve the minutes of April 21st.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, Shay, aye.
Stivers, aye.
Healy, aye.
Ratio I.
Belinda, aye.
Passes unanimously. Next item, the open space and rec plan. The only thing I just wanted to comment on this, well, you know, I'm going to move that we approve this, just to get it on the table first.
Second.
Move seconded, and for discussion purposes, the one thing that I just wanted to note on this was section 9 of the report. See if I can call it up. Has a chart in it, and section 9 is titled the 7-year action plan. And it has a list of goals, action, and responsible parties and partners. One of the items is develop a plan and process for permanently protecting identified parcels prior to their sale or development. And I had followed up with Ms. Danza on this, just to clarify exactly what that list of parcel was. And she referred me to an appendix to the report, and there's about 100 parcels that are identified in there. And I just want, you know, because BOS is identified as a partner in this, I just wanted it to be clear that, you know, I'm okay with being a partner in this, but I don't want, at least from my perspective, this to be perceived as my support for the town either acquiring or protecting every single one of those 100 parcels. You know, just, I haven't gone through the entire list, but I know the first page alone represents over $100,000 worth of property tax. That, you know, if it were acquired by the town, that's a significant amount of money that would come off of the tax base. So while I'm supportive of discussions with prioritizing parcels that the town should protect, and there are a number of those parcels that the town has already acted to protect, and I have fully supported those. Number one being the golf course, also the Halloran property. So there's already important open space parcels that our board has acted to support. I personally think that each one just needs to be evaluated on its own merits as it arises, and, you know, openly discussed. And it may very well be that there could be a difference of opinion between the groups, but I just didn't want that to be perceived as a, you know, as a blanket approval on my part that I'm in support of the town acquiring each of those parcels. So,
Brian, I agree, but I think what we're committing to is to develop a plan, which I envision being active discussion, communication, getting input, and so forth, not signing off at this point on purchasing or not purchasing any of those properties. I think it's a good base to work from, and we'll have a lot of discussion around that. But at least my reading of it is that we're saying we're going to work to put together a plan based on that list and make whatever decision falls out of that.
Yeah, Brian, I've got a broader comment, and the letter or memo, communicating this to us, specifically said we don't want any edits. This is a final product. I rarely vote to approve something that basically is a take it or leave it. And I'm wondering, is there a compelling reason why? I mean, when does this come in? Last Thursday or Friday? Why we don't? I mean, and it's incredible amount of work went into it, and very well done, very comprehensive. And there's a ton of stuff in there that I agree with, and a ton of stuff in there that I would at the very least have questions about. And I'm just wondering, is there a reason for the short amount of time for a turnaround for the Board of Selectmen? And is there a reason why the Board of Selectmen doesn't have the ability to weigh in on the substance of it? And maybe that's not a question for folks who are on this podcast or Zoomcast, whatever we're calling it. But again, it's an enormous document. A lot of work went into it, and I'm always wary about voting on something without having the ability to really dive deeply into it, which I clearly haven't had right now.
Marty, if I may, and I completely agree. Those are my reservations as well when I saw it. Normally, I would expect a Word document that, we would have that ability to offer some input instead of just, take it or leave it. And I'm not saying that they're expecting us to either. It's not a, all right, board, here you go, take it or leave it. But I do think there should be some there probably should be, and I would expect there be some back and forth on it. I think, Brian, you noted some that one section in particular. As Marty said, there are other things that I saw and I thought, oh, this is really solid work product by a group of very dedicated people. And we're going to vote on it. There was a recent policy that we were being asked to vote and approve, and it took us a few iterations before we were actually there. I know Sam worked on parts of it. Marty, you worked on something recently, and that's part of what this is. So I would like to see this come back to us. I would like to see a Word version, and I would like to see us have that ability to, just raise some questions and maybe even ask the proponents to join us and have a good discussion.
Yeah, Marty, I've been sort of following this. I think one of the issues is that you're right. This is sort of a take it or leave it at this point. I think there's some time pressure for some grant applications, but this has been bubbling around for several years now, and I and others have participated in a lot of these discussions along the way. So I think there's been a lot of opportunity to provide.
Well, I haven't had the opportunity as a member of the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, not as a Board of Selectmen member.
I mean, that's a big difference.
Yeah. So, again, I think that, the question is what kind of time pressure is there? And it's my understanding there's grant money that's available out there depending on.
I guess I'd like to know those deadlines and what needs to be done in order for those deadlines to be, for those grants to be applied for. Again, that's a terrific product, but,
And I know I never operate on the threat of grant money. I care, but I don't care. I mean, I'm not going to vote for something, take it or leave it because there may be a few dollars waiting around the corner. And then now, that's why you submitted 2-3 months ago, not the day before some grant money in hopes that that'll sway someone's, vote to just vote for it.
I'm not suggesting, Dan, that's the reason we should vote for it. I'm simply answering Marty's question of time pressure. But, I've reviewed it. I think it's a good plan. I'm prepared to support it. But,
all right, Ms. Braccio.
Thank you. Just a couple points. I mean, obviously, if there's any questions on it, it's better to have the questions answered. But Brian, just a quick point on what you had brought up on the parcels list. Not every parcel that's on that list or on prior lists has been the town hasn't gone after. For instance, there was the property on the Northborough Road that's now, I think it's Chestnut Meadows or whatever the subdivision that's there now. Also, the Dowd property on Deerfoot Road. Both those properties were listed on that list. The job of the Open Space Commission is, and I'm speaking because I used to be a member, is to facilitate the preservation of open space. And by not including them on a potential list is derelict in the duties that we are asked to do. So just because it goes on that list does not mean that the Board of Selectmen has to advocate for any of those, because there's 2 instances right there where that hasn't happened. It doesn't mean that it's set in stone, that the board is willing to move forward on and agreeing that, yep, all these are the parcels that we want to do. It's just a parcel list of priority parcels that the Open Space Preservation Commission would like to see preserved. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. And as we've seen in the past, it hasn't happened on some of the parcels.
No, understood. And I'm not questioning the parcels that are on that list. There's an excellent reason that they are on it. I'm not taking exception to that. I just wouldn't want somebody in the future saying, hey, this property is on the list. You committed to being a partner in protecting it. Therefore, as a board member, you have to do this. So
fair enough.
That's all.
Right.
I think everything needs to be debated on its merit as it comes up.
Fair enough.
Brian, just one short example. You've hit on one, but page 5, looking to the future. This document summarizes what Southborough wants to accomplish and outlines the necessary actions to take in the next 7 years. So, just by the language that is chosen, this is saying this is what Southborough wants to accomplish. It may be this is what the Open Space Commission wants to accomplish, or what. But if we're going to put our vote behind it, I want to make sure that statements like that, we all agree that yes, this is what Southborough wants to accomplish over the next 7 years, because if we're all being asked to vote on it, and statements like that are pretty direct. And
all right. So just to move this along, I'm going to suggest that we maybe have this as an agenda item for our meeting on the 19th and invite Ms. Danza and or others to come and, be prepared to answer questions that folks have, just so we can give this more time. I mean, we are kind of running against the clock here with other stuff that we still have to do. So the people.
Yeah, and Brian, I think that's a great idea. And for me, the most important thing is what are the deadlines that we're looking at?
Yeah.
I mean, heck, everything in the state, every deadline in the state is being pushed back. So I got to think that there might be some flexibility in here for us.
All right. So Mark, why don't we plan on taking this up again on the 19th? And
Okay.
so join us then.
Yeah, Ms. Danza is here tonight, could probably speak to some of the deadline issues, or you just want to push the whole thing to the 20th?
At this point, Mark, it's pushing 8:15, and I've been holding off Mr. Hegarty and registrars. I just want to race through as much as I can on the remainder of the agenda, quite honestly. We're running a little later than I thought that we would, so. Okay. Next item on the agenda, discussion of revisions to Selectmen policy on working remotely during COVID-19.
So I'll intro the item, and then I will turn it over to Mr. Stivers, who has done the majority of the work. The board, in your packet, you've got the policy that the board put in place about working remotely. One of the things that it did not address was a lot of the return to work pieces. And what Mr. Stivers took some of the information that Mrs. Hale was able to put together on some of those pieces and essentially crafted a new document. And I have said it privately, I will say it publicly. I think Sam did a really nice job of doing that. We did have it reviewed by Labor Council and made some changes and tweaks. Those were all incorporated into the document. So what you have in front of you is a document that Sam put together, but that has been reviewed and approved by Labor Council at this point. So Sam, I don't know what else you'd like to speak to that.
Quick comment. I think this is representative of what a lot of towns and other organizations are doing at this point, driven in large part by the current CDC recommendations. I'm dealing with this with my own business now, and I think that where we're headed is a standard based on immunity ultimately in terms of an important dimension of return to work capability. We're not there yet in terms of serum tests for antibodies and so forth for COVID-19. So at some point we're going to have to update this, but this seems to be a useful element to put in place to provide some clarity for employees as we move back toward return to work, and representative of what seems to be comfortable for a variety of organizations around. So I think we're in the mainstream on it, and we'll keep an eye on it going forward to amend as we get better science to tell us what's safe and what isn't.
Very good.
I
Any
have-
comments?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So just a few general comments. First, obviously the personnel board hasn't reviewed this, and my question to you, Mark, potentially is, are there items in here, including vacation carryover limits and some other items that may need the SAP changed and so may need a discussion with the personnel board? I don't know that we have the authority to overrule what's under their authority.
I will defer to Mrs. Hale, but I'll start the answer. I believe that the policy reflects the current, language that the SAP and the current provisions that the SAP allows.
I would agree. I don't think there's anything contradictory to the vacation carryover clause in the bylaw.
Well, just in general, not even just the vacation, but when you start getting into asymptomatic employees and the use of sick time and how the town is going to govern whether they have to use personal time or sick time for a potential illness they may have. Typically, sick leave is covered under the SAP. So are we going to potentially run into an issue where we're now dictating that if you're asymptomatic, but you haven't talked to your doctor, you have to use other time other than sick time? Do we have the authority to do that?
I don't think there's anything that would be a problem area the way you've described that, Lisa. We certainly will, verify that with our labor council. The language of the SAP that covers sick time is pretty short and sweet and a little bit vague. So I don't think that's an area of concern, but just to, if the town administrator agrees, we can, flag that area just to verify that with our labor council.
Why not send it to the personnel board and ask them for any comments?
Well, we can certainly do that as well. That would obviously take care of a lot of the issues and the concerns I had if we would do that before we enacted this policy. The last thing I want to do is create a policy and then have the personnel board come back where they haven't seen it, and it is affecting SAP employees as well. So that would be obviously a big recommendation of mine, Sam, if we could do that before we actually took a position on this. Because I worry about that, and then there's other questions on, under the asymptomatic employees again, that haven't received written direction, and we're basically dictating options to a sick employee. So, for instance, I'm an symptomatic, employee, and I'm being told that if I'm sick and I don't necessarily go to the doctor, but I know I'm not feeling great and I may have something, I might as well just say I have the flu if you go further within the document, and I can actually just take sick time and say I'm sick. So I worry that we're getting very specific.
With a lot of the language that I drafted was in consultation with guidance from the Board of Health and our public health nurse and, other folks. But, certainly we'll take the board's recommendations. I can tell you the personnel board is due to meet, I believe it's the third Wednesday in May.
And Lisa, the challenge I think is, one could be much more specific about some of these things, but then I think the document's already probably too long as it is, but you got to try to cover the expected likely events out there to make it clear for folks who may have these questions. So you got to strike a balance, and that seemed to be reasonable, but you could certainly tweak it.
Well, and like I mentioned, the vacation carryover limits. I mean, this is not a normal time for any of us. And so we're basically, according to this document, we're encouraging people to take time off now. They're in the middle of a pandemic. There's nowhere they can go. There's nothing they can do, but they're facing having to just take time versus currently what the carryover limits are. They're going to lose the time if they don't take it. So I worry about being fair to the employees as well, based on what the current policy says as far as, and Mark, you can probably speak to that better, the vacation carryover limits. What can they carry over currently under the SAP? Mark or Vanessa?
Go ahead, Vanessa.
You can carry over the amount of time that you are eligible to accrue in a 1-year period.
So they could potentially carry over into the following year. Say I have 2 weeks that I've
Correct.
accrued. I can carry over the full 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Okay, so I misunderstood that, but
There are provisions where you can be paid out for a portion of time and, other, examples, but primarily, yes, you're allowed to carry over what you earn in 1 year.
Okay, so that was my big, I have one other comment, Brian. I know that you're kind of in a hurry. Under the asymptomatic employees as well, as you're expected to telework. I worry dictating to an employee if you're sick that, and I know further in it says if you can't, you can't, but I don't know why we're putting in there that they're expected to telework under page 3, under 10, guidance leave under B. It tells the employee, an employee who is asymptomatic and is under the direction of self-quarantine is expected to telework. Well, again, it depends on how asymptomatic they or may not be. Just because you're not showing full symptoms, you may still be sick, you may be still experiencing something. So I worry again about being too specific and trying to dictate to an employee that they are expected to do this. So again, those are just some of my concerns. So I'll leave it at that. And I would really like to have personnel have a pass at this, just to make sure we don't have any issues down the road.
All right. All right,
That's
so
it
we
for
will
me.
do
Thank
that.
you.
We'll pass this along to
Yeah.
personnel board. Okay.
Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. Yeah,
All right.
again, this is why you get some stuff and review it.
Yep.
So.
All right. Next item, discussion of townwide mailing regarding resources available to residents, businesses during COVID-19.
Well, you skipped one, Brian. You skipped the email.
Hang on 1 second here.
Didn't you?
Nope.
Nope.
No. We're still on section
5B.
5, update on impact of COVID. So we just did.
Oh, okay.
all
Gotcha.
working remotely. Next, discussion of townwide mailing.
Mark, do you want me to deal with this, or you want to talk about it?
No, I will. This is your baby, and you've been handling it beautifully. So I'll let you take it.
Yeah, that's it. What's the phrase? The louder he spoke of his virtue, the faster I counted my spoons. So, anyway, the representatives of the community fund reached out to a number of folks in town government, trying to address to make sure that needs by town residents weren't being underestimated, slipping through the cracks during this highly unusual time. And so we've had a couple of virtual meetings. The most recent was at the end of last week with representatives from Youth and Family Services, the food pantry, the senior center, the Board of Health, obviously the town administration, and I was on the call as well as representatives from the community fund. And the consensus that was reached on that call is that because there's concern that there's a segment of the town population that doesn't access the internet, doesn't have access to the sort of information that an awful lot of us take for granted, and that that segment of the population might be also a segment of the population, or at least some subset of that might be facing needs during the crisis we find ourselves in. So the tentative decision was made, hopefully with the support of this board, to send out a townwide mailing. And that would be just that. It would be a townwide mailing, would go to every mailbox in the town of Southborough. It would be a summary of the Youth and Family Services, Senior Center, Health, Food Pantry, the various sources that are available to town residents, particularly during a time like this. The good news in that discussion is both all of the various agencies indicated that there really hasn't been a spike in demand by Youth and Family Services or the Senior Center, et cetera. That's the good news. The bad news is that this whole economic and health situation isn't going away quickly. And so the concern is to try to get information as comprehensively as possible to the town, and with detailing the various services, resources that are available. The community fund has indicated that they would fund it, that they would fund the mailing. We didn't have an exact number, and I know Vanessa's been working on that. Additional funding might be available again if the demand spikes and if there are needs that haven't surfaced so far. But that a mailing would go out that would be prepared in large part by Senior Center, Youth and Family Services representative, food pantry, detailing services that the town has available that people can access, how they should access it, hope that there's not an overwhelming demand, but if there is, let folks know that the resources are there. So I think I hit everything with that, Mark and Vanessa, but let me know if you need to fill in some blanks.
Brian, if I may.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I think that's great, Marty. Thank you so much for being involved in that and getting this done. I'd like to just make one possible recommendation. During these tough economic times for everybody, if there's any way to get that printed in town to help our own businesses in town, that would be a really great thing to do. Again, everybody's suffering a little bit, and it just might be where this is about community and helping each other. That might be a great avenue if we could pursue that as well.
That's a great point.
Thank you.
Marty, question, was there discussion around including with that message about if you actually want to donate to a fund that
Yes.
helps
Yes.
give instructions or some options for people to make donations, because I think
Yes.
there's a real need the longer this thing lasts.
Yes. And specifically, that'll be that'll be a part of the mailing.
Good.
All right. Any other?
So with that, I would like to, because the representatives of the various departments thought that it would be important that the message not come from them, but that it come from the town, through the Board of Selectmen. So I guess I would move that the board approve that approach and endorse sending out that mailing on behalf of the town and the Board of Selectmen.
Second. Any other discussion on that?
No, I mean, we haven't seen it, but I think, Marty, it sounds like if we're voting on something we haven't seen, but I trust your judgment. It sounds like it's incredibly comprehensive, and I don't know what it's going to ultimately look like when it goes out, but
I haven't seen it yet either, Dan.
It's in there. That sounds great, including, as Sam suggested, ways to donate, because there's lots of people in town who have that ability.
What I was going to say, Mark, I can when it comes through, whatever I don't know if it's going to come directly to you, to Vanessa, to me, I'm not sure, but it obviously can be sent out to the entire board before it gets put in the mail.
So I can just add a little bit more information here. I've been working with Sarah Cassell mostly. Other departments have provided content to us. Right now, we're just trying to agree on the format. What we're envisioning is like a 5x8, maybe something a little bit larger, like a heavy cardstock postcard with information on both sides. And, your mailing block information will be using the bulk permit that the Senior Center already uses for their newsletter mailings. So that's just to give you a little bit more of a visual. There's not an awful lot of room to provide a lot of description on all of these services, but we just want to get information out that these are the services that exist that you are eligible for and you should know about. And here's more information to learn more about how to access that service.
Sounds good.
Those funding it, I think, should be either privately or publicly thanked. I mean, that is wonderful what they're doing.
Absolutely.
So we need a motion to do that.
Sure. I mean, it's a community fund. And I'll hold off naming them because I'll just clear it with them first. You know, some
Yeah.
people like to remain anonymous.
Right. Yep. That's why I said it that way. Yeah. Thank you, Marty.
Okay.
Did we vote?
So the motion was made and seconded. Shay, aye.
Kalenda.
Healy,
Rashid,
aye. Thanks, everybody. And again, hopefully the segment of the population that is difficult to reach will be reached by this, and it'll accomplish a good.
Thank you.
Great
All
job.
right. Other matters properly before the board, assignment of board member for negotiation of successor contract for finance director. So Mr. Ballantyne's contract is coming up. I was looking for a volunteer to meet with Brian to discuss potential terms for an upcoming contract. And I had done that for the chief. If there's another volunteer who wants to meet with Brian, Mr. Healy.
I could do that.
Did you just volunteer me, Dan?
I did. I thought you'd be great, Marty. And then as soon as I was ready to say, your image popped up large on my screen. I think you'd be great with that, Marty.
Happy to do it.
Good.
Yeah.
That's great. I second that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, the faster
Yeah.
I count on my spoons.
All right, next item, discussion of use of town emails for officials conducting town business, email use policy. Mr. Purple, do you want to lead us into this?
I'll lead you into the discussion. I think Mr. Laflamme may want to be part of this discussion. This was and Mr. Stivers alluded that he attended the MTC meeting the other day, and one of the items they talked about a little bit was updating the email policy, and I think they made some adjustments to it that make some sense. I think that there was also some questions that have been raised by some members of the planning board. The town planner forwarded them to me. I included a copy of that email in your packet as a concern on some of the members' parts, and I don't have anything beyond what was sent to me by the planning board, so I'm assuming this is where it's coming from, that certain people don't want to use town emails for town business for some of the reasons that were outlined in the email. Obviously that is why we budgeted the money to provide town emails. That is why we put these in place. I know in terms of Mr. Laflamme can speak to the archiving piece and can speak to, the public record piece and all of that a little bit better. But Tom, I'll stop blathering and just let you speak.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Mark covered most of it. The biggest thing about email is that, as I understand it, the contents of email is subject to the same retention policies as physical memos or anything like that. So back in 2016, when I started, some of you were on the board at that time, I reported my initial assessment at that point and recommended that we investigate town emails for all board and committee members for these reasons. For having the ability to archive those messages, to respond to public records requests, all of that. Really anyone that's using their personal or professional email to conduct town business, it's really opening their own accounts up to discovery for public records. So in some regards, the issuance of a town email address is protecting the town, but it's also protecting you as members of boards, committees from that. And along those lines, board and committee members are not here for life, or some of you are, but even at that, there's times that we will no longer have access as a town to your personal emails. So, if we have a subject matter that's discoverable, say for 7 years, is the town going to retain access to your personal email account for 7 years? So these are some of the concerns that led to proposing the issuance of town email addresses. Now, I know that there were some questions about the policy and the definitions of board and committee members as staff. So what I did was I went back and changed some of that language and proposed through MTC the changing really the word staff to municipal employee and taking the definition directly from the conflict of interest laws that everyone is already subject to, everyone goes through the training, and it groups everyone into that one container basically. And it just kind of streamlined the policy writing rather than every time the word staff or now municipal employee shows up, I don't have to say departmental employee, board appointed or elected board committee members, things like that. And then the other thing that I think was, well, one of the things that I added was, I know that some board and committee members do like to have notifications sent to their personal email. So with our system, you can forward your email to your town email to a personal email address. And I made an adjustment to allow for that, basically saying that, you know, that's fine to do. But anytime you're composing a message that is in your official capacity, it must be through the town email service, again, for archiving and for discovery purposes.
All right, and I know the recommended changes to the policy were distributed earlier today as well. So I don't know if board members have any questions, comments, Mr. Healy?
I do. First of all, I didn't understand the communication from the town planner at all. And reading between the lines, it sounds like there's some sort of intramural spat between members of the planning board where some want to use town email and some people don't want to use town email. That's my reading between the lines, which quite frankly is none of our business other than looking at the changes that are made in the policy. I disagree with a couple of them because they almost endorse as okay not using town email. And I think we should be explicit that if somebody is using their personal email for town business, they are not acting in compliance with the town emails policy. We should be explicit about that. And if it was sort of an odd reference in there to disciplinary measures in the email policy that really aren't. We're just describing what is required by state law for public records and for conflict of interest and stuff like that. But I don't think we should have any wiggle room at all in that email policy, that if you are using other than town email for town business, you are not acting in compliance with the town emails policy. You know, take whatever risk you want in doing that, but I don't want any risk coming back to the town because we gave wiggle room to people to use their personal email for town business. I just think it's very problematic.
Perfectly said, Marty.
Yeah, and just to highlight the one thing is, I understand that this really kind of came to a head with this meeting environment, in that as I'm setting up the meetings, I basically made it a policy to only send the invitations to town email addresses. And really that came down to, there's about 150 board and committee members, and I just don't have the time and capacity to know who wants to and who does not want to receive their email in town email. So I went with the knowledge that everyone has an account and went from there.
So,
And if I could just add to Brian, sorry.
That's the way you should go, Tom. You shouldn't have to take time to figure out who wants to use town email, who doesn't want to use town email. If it's a town correspondence coming from you or coming from anybody that this board or that reports up to this board, town email account, period. That's the way the communication goes out, period. That would be my opinion. And if people are late getting messages and they're not getting it because they don't want to use that town email account, that's on them, not you. and not our board.
And I'll just
Lisa, go
add to
ahead.
that, Brian, if I can, that, you know, we had this discussion a year ago. This board took the exact same position as we're taking now. We spend a lot of money to get town emails. It's easier for public records requests and everything else. If you're doing town business, it should be under a town email. So I don't think this deviates from where we were a year ago. And I know Concom had questions at that point, and I know, Tom, you worked with them. We haven't heard anything else, so I'm assuming that was resolved. So I also agree, as Marty and you both said, Brian, that if it's town business, it should be on a town email.
But Lisa, if I may,
Yep.
for instance, in looking at the proposed changes in section 3, which is purpose,
Yeah.
it says the new bold, that's the additional language, Tom?
No,
That's
anything
there.
in bold was already there. You know, and quite honestly, that was left over from the fact that when this was initially drafted, there were board and committee members that were not issued a town account. That has since been rectified, and everyone does have it. So
Okay, I guess because I take that language out.
okay.
I mean, that
Yeah,
says
Marty, go ahead. Go ahead.
we don't have to do it tonight, but again, I just think that anything in this policy that gives wiggle room for not using town email for town business should be out.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So Tom, if you could look at that particular paragraph 3, because I made a point to Mark earlier. It seems like throughout the document, you caught all the areas where you mentioned employees, elected, appointed members, blah, 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 and just changed it to municipal employees.
Yeah.
It seems to have been not caught in this line.
Yeah.
And I would just shorten that second sentence, Marty. These guidelines apply to members of boards and committees, period. You know, there is wiggle room for using your own. So why don't we, again, revisit this, just so we're not making the sausage here with this tonight. If we want to, you know, offer comments to Mark for consideration of approving this at our next meeting, or how do we want to act? What action do we want to take with respect to this policy?
I'm fine with the policy. With that minor change that you just mentioned, I read through it and I thought it was fine.
Yeah, there was that instance, and then honestly, the only other one was is in 6, where it says if staff do not use the municipal email system. Again, I wouldn't give them that wiggle room. I would just say staff who do not use the municipal email system are not in compliance with this policy, period.
I agree with that.
So noted.
Okay.
All right, so do we want to, so what action do we want to take?
If folks are comfortable, those are pretty straightforward. I'm comfortable approving the policy as Tom has revised it with those 2 minor amendments.
Second.
And what I'll do, if it's okay, is I will send it along with those revisions to Marty, just to make sure I'm capturing exactly what you have requested, so that it's in that compliance with what you're taking a vote on.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Perfect.
All those in favor, Shay, aye.
Ratio I.
Stivers aye. Ely aye.
That's all.
Tom, I just made those changes in the document, so I'll just forward that to you.
All right,
great.
Last is a list of reappointments of staff positions for FY21. This standard procedure is to include in our agenda for one meeting a list of all the people that we intend to reappoint. Give them the time period, or give folks, board members, 2-week time period to consider that. We'll act on it at our next meeting. And at our next meeting, we'll also have a list of board and committee reappointments, Mark, correct? Or at an upcoming meeting?
That is, yes, I'm sorry, just want to make sure my mute was on. That is correct. So what the normal process is, we put it on the under other matters first so you can see them. And then at the next meeting, it will end up on consent agenda for your approval. The same will happen next meeting. You will have a list of all board and committee appointments, and then they will end up on consent at the following meeting.
All right. All right, so we
Brian?
will see this list appear under consent next week. Is there any
Yes.
comments on the list?
Brian, a comment?
Go ahead, Sam.
I would raise an issue that I'd raised about a year ago now. I think it's useful to think about legal services again. And we talked about this briefly last year with the conclusion that folks felt that it needed a little more time for study. I think it's worthwhile to look at how we buy legal services and think about looking for proposals on that, not necessarily to suggest that town council and other special counsel are not doing what we need them to do, but I think it's just prudent to keep an eye on the market and look for other opportunities that might be proposed to us there. So there was, at least I thought, some support for that concept last year, and I'd like to get that in the pipeline sooner this time.
So I
agree, it's worth a discussion.
Yeah, but am I hearing you say, it sounds like you said you are not singling out town council again, which I think was what was perceived last year. Or is that not the same thing that's happening now?
That was not at all my intent last year, Dan. I said, I buy legal services in my day job, and I keep an eye on the market. I go out and talk to people continuously, looking for different ways to get done what I need done. I inquired last year, and apparently the town has not actually asked for proposals on legal services for at least 10 or 15 years, as I understand it. So I think it's just prudent to talk to people and say, you know, what other ways are there of doing this? Is that useful or not? And we can certainly wind up renewing exactly the arrangement we have now, but I think it's prudent to look at the market.
I'll just share what looks incredibly odd to me is the continual singling out of town council, and by whom we've been incredibly well served over the last number of years. I've been on this board for 9 years, and Aldo Cipriano has been absolutely amazing. The history that he has of this town, the dedication he has, the legal advice that he gives, unpassionate legal advice, he gives it how it is. And I think at a very good price. I've seen the work product, and he has been absolutely exceptional. To pick that one out again, to single that one out, if you're suggesting that all we need to do is get proposals for one budget item, town council, no, I mean that sends a horrible signal, not only to him, but that everyone else gets a pass. So if you suggest that we should be doing that for legal services, what's the rationale for not requiring that of every single service that this town receives every single year?
I think we should do that, and we actually do that. We get bids for fuel oil and salt and all those kind of things, commodities.
Town council is not fuel oil.
Yeah,
legal
we get
services
consulting
is not fuel oil.
Consulting services, Dan, we get bids for consulting jobs for people. So this is consulting, basically.
I will go on record. I once again absolutely disagree with what I believe is behind what Mr. Stivers is saying, and I do not go along with singling out one entity. I actually fully support the services that we've been getting from Mr. Cipriano. I'm not going to send a signal to him that this board member does not agree with the level of service or the compensation that we've been. In fact, if I see correctly, we have not increased the amount that we have paid for legal services in years, and he hasn't asked for an increase, which I find baffling, because services continue to go up, and yet he's kept it, and we've kept it at the same amount for years. So this board member does not go on record for Stivers' request.
Mark, this is just on for notice today, correct?
Right.
Okay, so I think it's worth a discussion. I don't know how it gets posted next time. I guess you described it, and I think I understood it. But again, any contractual service, I think, is worth discussion.
Which is my point.
So for discussion at our next meeting, then, well, it'll be under consent, and we can discuss it at that time, whether we act on that particular appointment or not.
Okay. So you do not want, you want me to include that as part of the package under consent, and that you don't want me to separate that item out specifically for other matters?
We can hold it, but, we'll go through the list, and those that folks want held, we can hold.
And that, by the way, in my view, includes, all legal services, counsel, special counsel, et cetera.
All right.
Fine with that approach.
All right. So I'm going to go back now to Mr. Hegarty and the Board of Registrars of Voters. So Lisa, oh, you're on mute, Lisa, but I presume you're recusing.
Yes, I'm sorry. I will recuse myself at this time. So everyone stay safe and have a good night.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Take care, Lisa.
Thanks.
Mr. Hegarty and board members. Mark, if we could bring in the board members as panelists, just so we can let them call their meeting to order at this point.
Jim, this is where you're well served as a former FBI agent. You're used to hurry up and wait. Maybe you didn't even hear me.
Actually, Jim, are you there? Could you hear us? You're on mute now, Jim. Looks like. All right, so do we have all the board members as panelists?
It's a very good question. This is Tomasz.
Tomasz, how are you? I can hear you.
How are you?
Very well.
Good evening. This is Tracy Navaroli.
Tracy, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Hi, Brian. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, great.
Yes. And do we have one more board member?
Keith.
I am here.
Keith, very good. All right. So I'll let your board call yourselves to order.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Tomasz Kirul. I'm a chair of the Southborough Board of Registrars of Voters. I'm opening this May 5th, 2020 virtual meeting of the Southborough Board of Registrars of Voters, which is a joint meeting with the Southborough Board of Selectmen. I will dispense the reading of the virtual meeting preamble required pursuant to the Governor's Baker March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, since the chair of the Board of Selectmen has already read it. I will now call the roll of the members of the Board of Registrars. Please state present when I call your name. Keith Ackley.
Present.
Tracy Navaroli.
Present.
Jim Haggerty.
Present.
Okay.
Tomasz Kirul present as well. All 4 members of the Board of Registrars are present in this meeting. Of course, I would like to proceed with the agenda, the item that was attached. So we discussed setting the new date for the previously postponed Southborough annual town election, and setting up especially the date, as mentioned before, also discussing the location and setting the hours of the election. And I would ask now Jim Haggerty to talk about certain recommendations we have as the Board of Registrars.
Hello. I would recommend that we set Tuesday, June the 16th as the date for the annual town election, that we continue to hold the voting at the Trotter School, but we will actually change the location from the gym to the entrance through the school lobby and then into the band room. I'd also recommend that we change the hours for the election so that the polls be open for 8 hours from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. For a municipal election, towns are only required to be open for 4 hours and to be open by noon. So this actually exceeds that. I suggest we reduce the hours to 8 to 4 because frankly, we've had a tremendous number of people that we're up to 130 some odd people who have already submitted early voting by mail applications, plus another 40 people that submitted absentee ballots earlier. And this is still early in the process. I doubt that many people will want to come in person. And frankly, because I process these ballots every day, little comment. The clerks doesn't have the opportunity to work from home. We have to work in the office every day because of the state computers. So our work hasn't gone down at all. But my point is I see everybody's name that comes across. And when I see the people that are requesting to early vote by mail, they're people that I recognize that are people that this isn't a new group of people. These are people that typically would come to town elections. So I think we're going to have a limited turnout. I've gone back and reviewed the last 10 years worth of historical participation and tried to link that to elections when we've had multiple candidates, contested races, and we've had a situation like this where we only have one contested race. So that would be my recommendation, that we hold it on that Tuesday and we go from there.
Any comments on that? Questions?
No, Jim, just very, you said between absentee and early voting, it's what, in the 160, 170 range right now?
Right.
What is normal, contested municipal election? Is it usually like 1,000, 1,100?
No, for a race, for an election like this one, looking at who's involved and the fact that you have a write-in, I went back and looked at who were the people that ran. Did they have substantial bases and so forth? If I was a betting man for this election, I would expect a turnout of under 1,000, probably in the range of 800 or so. We've gone from as low as 359 up to 1,727 and 1,500. And those two anomalies were in 2015 and 2017 when we had contested races for clerk and multiple people running for selectmen. So the typical turnout for a race like this one, you would expect to see around 1,000-ish, maybe 800. So I think when it's all said and done, I would, and I've talked to some other towns that have already had their elections, I anticipate when it's all said and done, we're going to be well over 400 people early voting by mail.
Okay. And I guess the last thing is, I mean, you've been doing a great job getting the word out by, as you can see from the numbers. Anything else you need? Anything else we can do to sort of, beat the drums to make sure people vote early rather than holding off till June 16th?
Well, you bring up an excellent point, because when I posted this on the blog, we had a number of people that responded right away, but the owner of the blog had recommended that people hold off requesting an early voting ballot here. The problem with this, especially with younger kids, is that no matter how many times you say this, some people mistakenly think that as long as they get the ballot in the mail by midnight, the night of the election, it's going to count. It doesn't work that way. The ballot has to be received here by the time the elections close. And because these ballots can only be delivered by mail, we need at least a week for the process to work properly for us to be able to mail a ballot to somebody for it to come back and all the rest of it. So we need people, if people want to take advantage of this, we'd like them to do it as quickly as they can.
And Jim,
Okay,
great,
thanks, Jim.
great point. What, Jim, why the choice of the band room this time?
Okay. Well, and this sort of ties into the review I did of the auditorium, the gymnasium. One of the concerns is we don't know what June is going to look like in terms of social distancing and what we're allowed and so forth. And one of the concerns you have for the auditorium is people have to enter and exit through the same entrance. It gets complicated. And this actually, Keith Lavoie actually had this as a terrific idea. If people will enter through the lobby, we can actually set the check-in up in the area where the Girl Scouts are. And we still have to have check-in for 3 different precincts. So we can separate the workers and manage that properly. And we'll have a police officer in the lobby that allow people in one at a time. And after they check in, we'll have them get down the corridor adjacent to the auditorium to the band room at the end. We'll allow one person at a time to go to a booth and then check out. So they'll go out. So you have one entrance, one exit kind of a situation. It's a pretty safe way of doing it. And then my tip of the hat to Keith Lavoie for that suggestion.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks. Hey, if I could just segue to 2 seconds, I'm surprised nobody asked a question about the using the gymnasium for the annual town meeting. If I could just give me 10 seconds on that. You have 505 seats in the auditorium, but I literally went through and counted and measured how many people you could put to have a 6-foot separation. And you can only have less than 60 people in that room, believe it or not, when it's all said and done. That's why we have to go to the gym. But the flip side of that, something that also wasn't mentioned tonight, the cost to hold this in the gym is going to be around $8,000, which is on line with what we had before, when we had that overflow as well. So I am worried, the discussion to limit the articles, you don't want to overflow it. But on the other hand, what happens if we spend that kind of money and we don't have 100 voters show up, especially in these times? So sort of a catch-22 here, that you want to encourage 100 people to come, but it would be kind of a bad situation to have to expend that kind of money to do it properly and not have attendance. So any thoughts you have on making that work, we're good to go. But anyway, that's the reason why we'll do it safely in the band room.
All right.
Thank you, Jim.
I guess just one point that I would make, that you touched on town meeting, and certainly there's legislation in place to allow town meeting to go past June 30th if it has to. There's, advantages to the town to having town meeting before then. The election, though, is mandated to be held by June 30th. So the way things stand now with respect to legislation, we have to have this town election before June 30th. We don't have the ability to go beyond. So I personally am okay with that date. It's on a Tuesday. Just logistically, from our perspective, Mark, I think we typically would have held a meeting that night. So we'll need to move our second meeting in June back to the 23rd. If we meet on the first Tuesday in June, and then we would meet on the 23rd. So we would not meet that, and would not be able to meet on the 16th, correct, Jim? We cannot.
That is correct.
So that's, but I think that logistically it makes sense. And again, I think it's important for people to understand the logistics that you have. While it makes sense to have it in the band room, it could be a very, very slow voting day. So there's a lot of strong reasons for people to, if you do plan on voting, get a ballot, get an early ballot, an early voting ballot. At least have it in your hands right now. If you want to hold off on voting until you find out more from the candidates, that's great, but take actions now to get that ballot in your hands so that we can get as many people as possible voting early, to cut down on the number of people that need to actually physically be in attendance to vote.
And we will be mailing the ballots out on Friday for everybody that's already requested them. We have the ballots in now.
Okay.
Oh, hey, one little, you mentioned something about, we're going to do something a little different after this election in terms of swearing people in, because all the elected officials have to be sworn in person. So on the day after the election at 5 p.m., I will swear everybody in person simultaneously. We're going to have a mass swearing in front of on the steps of the library. All right, we'll have a little community event with appropriate public spacing. So everyone who gets elected, be there or be square. 5 p.m. the day after the election.
Okay.
That's a great idea.
Hey, Jim, one question, if I may, on the request to vote early, or not in person. The form that's on the town website, which is what I'm looking at, it has to be printed out and then somehow scanned in order to send to the town clerk email address, right? I don't see a way that people can electronically fill this in and then electronically sign and then electronically submit. It still has to, people have to be able to have a printer, have a scanner, do all those things, right?
Yeah, that system, that form, unfortunately, does not have fillable PDF. If somebody wanted to print it and or put a signature on it, I will accept it. So if somebody wants to do that, wants to edit themselves with a tool and do it, be happy to take it.
I thought I was able to, so I have already submitted this application, and I thought I did it all electronically. I know I didn't print it and I didn't scan it again, so.
There you go. Yeah. And we've had a lot of the people just taking it, printing and taking a picture, but any way they want to do it. I expect that come the fall, we will have the majority of people, a lot of people doing this for the November election, and we'll create our own form in the fall that allow people to fill in the blanks and go from there and do it all electronically.
Thank you, Jim. I think that'd be a lot quicker. Maybe Brian may have had something on his own personal system that allowed it to convert into a fillable PDF, but I think that's a separate software package that folks have to buy that many may not have. So
We'll make it work.
thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
I could be very well technically advanced too, Dan.
As an engineer, I trust you.
Not overlook that.
I won't.
All those.
I did
super
not take
skills.
that to be a slight, Brian.
Nor was it meant.
No, I understand. I'm getting
Just
punchy.
having fun.
Getting punchy.
So what do we need? What does
all
Mr.
right.
Hagerty need?
I also want to thank the Board of Registrars. I know when the legislation was passed to allow the extension of and a delay in setting the town election date. Originally it was set up so that it would be the Board of Selectmen that could make this point. I made an observation when the legislation was going through its process that technically having an elected board getting their hands in an election process, and I thought that the Board of Registrars also ought to have a role in this. So I thank you all very much for joining this meeting as well. Is there disagreement or agreement from your board on the date of the 16th and the hours that have been mentioned?
This is Tomasz again. Yes, we do have an agreement, and actually, yes, we do. And my understanding is that we have to make a motion now as a board to pass that. So I would like to do that now, if that's okay.
Go ahead, Tomasz.
Yeah, I move that the Southborough Registrars of Voters vote to set the date for the postponed Southborough annual town election as Tuesday, June 16, 2002, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., with the election to be held in the Trottier Middle School. All those in favor?
I second it.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for seconding it, Jim. All those in favor?
Jim, yes.
Tracy, yes.
Keith, yes.
And Tomasz Kirul, aye as well.
So I'll make that same motion for the Board of Selectmen that we recommend the town election date of Tuesday, May 16th, with hours from
June 16th.
June, I'm sorry. I move for the town election be held Tuesday, June 16th, from the hours of 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved, seconded. Shay, aye.
Divers, aye.
Healy, aye.
Linda.
Very good. The two boards are unanimous in that.
Thank you for that.
So Tomasz, if you want to do your motion for your minutes.
Yes, Jim, if you could please do that.
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to approve the draft minutes that you received earlier today with two changes. First, to add a start time of 8:58 p.m. on the first line, and for adjournment at 9:12 p.m. And I'd make a motion that those minutes be approved with those two modifications.
Second.
All those in favor?
Jim, aye.
Tracy, aye.
Keith, aye.
And Tomasz Kirul, aye as well. Okay, with that, I guess we have the final motion. So I move that this May 5th meeting in the virtual form of the Southborough Board of Registrars of Voters adjourns.
Am I?
I guess.
Tracy, aye.
Yeah.
Don't you guys wish you could do your minutes that easily, huh?
Hey, thank you.
All in favor. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your patience and hanging on as long as you did. Thank you very much.
Good night, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Good night.
Take care.
Last item we have on our agenda is public comment. Is there any public comment? Going once, going twice. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Shay, aye.
Kalinda, aye.
Healy, aye.
I heard everybody. We're unanimously adjourned. Thank you all.
Thanks, Steve.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.